Welcome to AUC Author Series. In this series of programs, we interview the authors in the Atlanta University Center community and introduce you to their latest published works. This program is produced by Brad Oss and Daniel Lee.
Our guest today is Dr. F.S.J. Ledgister, Assistant Professor and Chair of the Political Science Department at CAU. Dr. Ledgister will be discussing his book, Only West Indians, Creole Nationalism in the British West Indies, and his essay, Racist Rantings, Travelers' Tales, and a Creole Counterblast, Thomas Carlyle, John Stuart Mill, J.A. Froude, and J.J. Thomas on British Rule in the West Indies.
Especially not in this area.
Okay.
Good morning, Dr. Ledgister. Welcome to Robert Woodruff Library. Let us talk about your publications. Last year, 2010, you wrote a book called Only West Indians, Creole Nationalism in the British West Indies. And then you wrote a chapter in a book. The book came out in year 2010 as well. Racist Rantings, Travelers' Tales, and a Creole Counterblast. Thomas Carlyle, John Stuart Mill, J.A. Froude, and J.J. Thomas on British rule in the West Indies. If you don't mind, could you please give us an overview of these two publications?
All right. Well, Only West Indians is an attempt to look at what's called Creole nationalism. That is to say, it's the form of liberal nationalism that emerged in British colonies in the West Indies in the mid-20th century. And that had its roots in reactions to the kinds of racist views that emerged in Britain about the West Indian colonies in the 19th century. So what I do in the book is I look at 3 or 4, it depends on how you want to count it, major figures in the politics of decolonization in the British colonies in the West Indies in the 20th century and the late 19th century. J.J. Thomas, who was a schoolmaster in Trinidad in the 19th century and who wrote a monograph called Fraudacity about the writings of an Englishman named James Anthony Froude. But in order to do that, I had to write about the context in which Thomas was writing. So I ended up writing about not just Froude, but about Thomas Carlyle, Charles Kingsley, and Anthony Trollope, all of whom wrote about the proper place of the West Indies and of black West Indians and other West Indians of colour in the 19th century. And I wrote about an early work of the writer C.L.R. James. Now, James was best known as a major figure in Marxist thought in the 20th century. He was a major figure in the Trotskyist movement. He was a major figure in the Pan-Africanist movement. But his earliest work, The Case for West Indian Self-Government, was actually within the liberal democratic tradition, and it was an argument for independence for the West Indies, published in 1933. Then I write about Norman Manley, who was the founder of the People's National Party in Jamaica. It's the oldest existing political party in the English-speaking Caribbean. It still exists today. It's the opposition party in Jamaica. And his role in developing the nationalist movement in Jamaica and the ideas behind it. And the second to last chapter is about Eric Williams, who founded the People's National Movement in Trinidad, the oldest existing political party in Trinidad and Tobago today, and his role there. And Dr. Williams, DPhil from Oxford, taught history and political science at Howard. He actually lectured here at Atlanta University in the 1940s. Perhaps one of the most important, if not the most important, intellectual figure in the English-speaking Caribbean in the 20th century. And I conclude by looking at how Creole nationalism was superseded after independence, why, after succeeding in leading the West Indies to independence, Creole nationalism was superseded, and why it might still have meaning for us today. Now, the chapter in Thomas Carlyle Resartus is, in essence, the second chapter from my book, shortened because it's focused on Thomas Carlyle and on Froude, and to a degree on Thomas. Now, actually, that chapter began separately from the book. It was something that I started in graduate school because I was looking at, initially, a debate between two major 19th century Englishmen, and well, Carlyle was a Scotsman, Thomas Carlyle and John Stuart Mill, on the question of how should the West Indies be governed after slavery was abolished. Now, the British abolished slavery in the West Indies in 1834, and thereafter the West Indies became a somewhat neglected colonial area. Some people said, well, you know, now the Negroes have become very lazy and the West Indian economy is in decline, and Thomas Carlyle was the supporter of that particular cause in Britain. John Stuart Mill, perhaps the most significant philosopher of 19th century liberalism, disagreed with him, and there was a huge and furious debate in mid-19th century Britain over what was called the Negro question. Carlyle used a much different word in the pamphlet he published in the mid-19th century, The Occasional Discourse, and I won't use that word here. And that was a central political debate, and that got to be important because there was a revolt in Jamaica in 1865, the Morant Bay Rebellion, which rather crystallized the meaning of that debate, since after all, the Negroes were not only a question, they were actually revolting. And Carlyle and Mill represented two different factions in British intellectual life that formed movements around that revolt. Carlyle supported the governor of Jamaica, Edward John Eyre, who had very brutally suppressed that revolt, but who was recalled afterwards because of the brutality of the suppression. And Mill led an organization that sought to prosecute Eyre because you can't simply impose martial law on Her Majesty's subjects and hope to get away with it. And after all, black Jamaicans in the middle of the 19th century were free subjects of Queen Victoria, just like Englishmen. Now, that article goes on to look at how in the 1880s, James Anthony Froude, who was by many seen as Carlyle's most important successor in 19th century Britain, went out to the West Indies and wrote about it and got many things wrong, and how J.J. Thomas responded to Froude in his book Fruidacity. And because this particular book, Thomas Carlyle Resartus, comes out of a conference of Carlyle studies held a couple of years ago at Villanova University, this is part of my own contribution to a revival of Thomas Carlyle studies that's been going on over the past few years.
Dr. Ledgister, could you please tell us what happened to Carlyle and in this debate?
Well, it's an odd thing, because Carlyle both lost and won the debate. In a sense, he lost the debate because Governor Eyre was removed from the governorship. Jamaica became a crown colony. It was directly governed by the crown, which was eventually to the advantage of black Jamaicans, even though they lost the opportunity at the time to gain any kind of political participation. At the same time, what Carlyle had been hoping for was to abort the development of what he saw as a real threat to the natural political order, which was the emergence of democracy in Britain, because Carlyle was extremely hostile to democracy. He was a great believer in aristocracy. So in the long run, Carlyle really lost the debate, but he was the more popular figure. Mill, who at the time was Member of Parliament for Westminster, lost also because he lost his seat in Parliament, and he had been able to raise the issue directly in Parliament. In the longer run, Carlyle lost, but Britain is a democracy today. Mill won, in a sense, because it is Mill's point of view that ultimately triumphed. But Mill lost at the time. His point of view was less popular. Mill was in favour of uplifting the black race. We would see him today as rather patronising, but he was anti-racist. Carlyle was extraordinarily racist, and he was seen as racist then, but his point of view was in the majority.
Dr. Ledgister, the debate that you capture in your book, the debate between Mill and Carlyle, what was the foundation for the debate? Was it for economic reasons or human? Why did the debate come up?
Well, economic reasons underlie a lot of human activities. Carlyle believed in what he called what was to be called the great man theory of history, that all of history was the product of the doings of great men. Now, certainly there was an economic underpinning to that, since, after all, even great men need to eat. And when you look at Carlyle's economic theory, such as it is, what you find is a belief that your great man will tell you what to do and what to produce, and you will then go out and produce it. Not so much for its intrinsic value as because your ruler has told you that it is worthy to be produced. And he says in the occasional discourse that the West Indies is good for producing spices and sugars and other valuable things, and the Negroes should be put to work to produce them by those who are better than them. And apparently those who are better than them can be identified because they have pink skins. Mill, on the other hand, was, among the various things that he did, an economist. He wrote a massive study of political economy, and he had a profound belief in the economic underpinnings of certain kinds of behavior, and he wanted an economy based on human liberty. He was a follower of David Ricardo in that respect. So Mill certainly had an economic view. He was a follower of what we would today call classical liberal economics. And from Mill's point of view, freedom in the West Indies should be entirely governed by free market considerations. Let people choose what they will do. Let the market decide what wages should be, what prices should be, and so on. So Mill is certainly allowing economic considerations to govern him in that particular, from that particular point of view.